Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us wherever you are in the world. We know we have people here from the US, we've got New Zealand and Australia, and there may be people from other parts of the world that we don't know of. So thank you for taking time to join us. We'd love to know where you are joining us from. And also, tonight's or today's webinar is all about travel. We'd love to hear from you. When you are traveling your horse, what are you most stressed about? And also anything you'd really like to cover in today's webinar. We'd like to hear from you. So jump on into the chat section. We'll talk about the Q&As later on when we get started. But right now I want to hear all about you. We're very excited about how many people have actually signed up for this webinar. It's really interesting for us when we create these webinar titles and topics. We never really know which ones will be of most interest. And certainly this travel one, there's been a great number of you have registered. So you will be amazed at the content that's being shared tonight. So thanks again. So just smiling, looking at all the different places you're coming from. So also let us know, what is it that stresses you when you're traveling your horses? Anything at all. We just want to hear from you about what your pain points are. One of the things that we know is traveling is something we do so often, and we often, up until now, haven't taken the time to understand the impact it has on our horses. And that's absolutely what we'll be addressing in tonight. But it's not all doom and gloom. We want to continue to travel our horses. So how do we make it more enjoyable for them? Again, thank you everyone for taking time out of your day and night to join us. We are really grateful for that. We all have busy lives, and it's wonderful to see so many of you here. And so many of you turned up early, which is really fabulous for us. We have allowed an hour and a half. The reason being there's so much great content to get through, and we also want to have time for you to ask questions as we go through. I'll come back to that. So let's get started. For those of you who have joined us before, you may recognize some of the people on the panel, and you may recognize me. I'm Linda, and I'm from Poseidon Animal Health, and I am the co-founder of this company that I am grateful to work for and work with every day. And we truly are committed to changing and improving the lives of our horses, mainly through gut health. But what we've learned on our journey since we started is that our horse's gut impacts on so much, and that 30-meter gastrointestinal tract has such a big impact to play. So what we now know is so much of what we impose on our horses has an impact on their gut. So even though we deliver incredible evidence-based supplements, we are so committed to educating and helping us all as horse owners make better choices for our horses. And that's what's exciting. So that's my introduction. I will now ask each member of the panel just to jump in and say hello. You'll be hearing more from them in a moment, but I'd like to start with Dr. Erin Roddy.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining, and we can't wait to answer all of your questions and hopefully give you some really good information and tips on making travel better for your horses.
Thanks, Dr. Erin. Dr. Chris?
Yeah, kia ora, everybody. I'm living here in the Waikato in New Zealand, and yeah, very excited to present this information today. Please don't forget the Q&A. We'll try to get to them as we go. And I would say at the beginning of this is just put yourself in the horse's situation as we go through all this information and making the world a better place for them and you.
Thanks, Dr. Chris. Dr. Erin's joining us. I think she's in Florida. She's traveling around the US a lot. And then we have Dr. Tiffany joining us. We are so thrilled to have her. This is her first webinar with Poseidon. And Dr. Tiffany is joining us from Kentucky, if I'm correct.
Yes, that's correct. I am in Lexington, Kentucky currently, and very excited to be joining my first webinar with Poseidon Animal Health.
Thanks, Dr. Tiffany. As I mentioned, amazing group of people here tonight. So again, ask lots of questions. So what are we going to cover today? We'll start with the history of horse travel. It's always good to get some perspective about where we've been and where we are now. We'll talk about the physiology of travel stress. What does it actually do to your horse, and how does that show up? We'll then move on talking about travel stress and colic, and it's something that has such a strong link. So that will be an amazing area to cover. So we'll create a picture, paint a picture, look at all the risks, but then it's like, well, what do we do about this? And that's the exciting bit, is how do we protect our horse's gut from travel? Because we still want to travel, we still want to compete, we still want to do these things, but how do we, as I said earlier, make it better for the horse? Then we'll take you through a really great way of preparing for travel, pre-travel, during travel, and post-travel. and then we'll talk about a recovery plan. So there's lots to get through, lots of amazing content to share. Please ask the questions as we go along. And with great pleasure, I will now hand over to Dr. Chris.
Yeah, so just to set this all up, the horse, whenever I talk about horses, and everybody listening obviously loves their horses, it is, if you really think about it, there's not any other animal on this planet that has impacted human history, at least in the last 6,000 years, more than the horse. And so I think we have to always kind of understand the history of our relationship with them and where we are today in 2025. Since we first domesticated them in Eurasia about 5,500 years ago, horses have been on the move with us ever since. Now, initially that was with their own hooves, or we were on their back, or they were pulling chariots, later carts and wagons. But now horses, obviously went across many oceans, even going all the way to Antarctica. And today they're flying all over the world. It's incredible. These companions are just so important to our own story and everything they've done for us. Now, the first outside of horses on their own feet being moved, 3,500 years ago, we were transporting horses on little ships. And so they've been on the move. And it's interesting, people, especially when I grew up in the United States, didn't understand that horses went extinct there 10,000 years ago. And then they crossed the Atlantic Ocean with the Spanish and were reintroduced in 1535 when they landed in Mexico. And then horses were reintroduced to where they evolved. Now, today we don't transport horses as often on ships anymore. It's more airplanes and then obviously the trailers and the floats. Now, I love this one. When was the first float, which for the American audience, floats is what we call trailers here in New Zealand and Australia. And for Aussies and Kiwis, in America, we call them trailers. The first evidence we have of a horse being pulled in a trailer goes back 2,000 years ago to the Romans, where they had horses pulling horses. And the idea was they would stick them in these carts and another horse would pull them so they could save their energy, say, for racing in the Circus Maximus. Now, as you're going to find out in this webinar, it's actually kind of physically demanding. Dr. Aaron has some incredible data to share with you on what it's like for that horse in the trailer physically. So even though they were trying to rest their horse, in actuality, they were probably stressing it out a little bit and they were burning some energy. Now, after World War II, with the automobile becoming the main mode of transportation, with highways becoming more common, we start to see more horses on the move in trailers. In the 1960s, it was really where you start to see horses explode again as companion animals in competitions and pleasure riding, that you see horses on the move quite a bit. So for the last 60 years, this has been a common mode of transportation for them. Now, what's really interesting is the horses around the planet, about 60 million, are the #1 animal moved around the world compared to cattle, sheep, pigs. When the University of Ghent did a study just a couple years ago looking at data on how many horses were on the move, they took data from FEI and other sources. It was estimated about 250,000 horses each year are on the move strictly for competition. But when we looked at it for other reasons, they're estimating around tens of thousands of horses are on the move each and every day, which is about 0.02% of the total population of horses on the planet. So the bottom line is horses are on the road. Every weekend when I'm driving here, I see horse floats all over the place. People are on the move, going to competitions, going for riding. Air travel is becoming a more prevalent way, especially for some of these top-end horses, to compete around the world, and also in breeding, and as you're going to see, in purchasing horses. So it's estimated around 10,000 horses a year are flown around the world. And again, like I said, moving by boat is rare, but it still happens. Now, what are some of the reasons we're moving these horses? Some of us watching or even me presenting. I mean, I've taken horses in emergencies and trailers to competitions, to parades, casual riding, breeding, going back and forth to breeding farms, or you purchased a new animal or even a rescue animal. So there's lots of reasons horses are on the move each and every day. Now, this is an interesting video that I'm going to play here in a second. Let me set it up for you. I want you to put yourself in this horse's position. Okay, and trying to think of one of the most stressful transportation scenarios. The Keeneland yearling sales, some of the top thoroughbreds in the world, are coming from all over the world, from Europe, Asia, Australia, New Zealand. These horses are being flown and shipped to Keeneland yearling sale in Lexington, Kentucky. These horses go for millions of dollars, and then they're transported to wherever they're going to train, or whoever purchased them. So let's imagine you have either horses on the road from, say, Florida or California, traveling hundreds of miles, in some instances, a couple thousand miles to Kentucky, or they're going to get on an airplane and fly to Kentucky and purchased and then go wherever their new home is. So in some instances, these yearling horses that have probably been on a single farm their whole life are experiencing a whole new world. So let's play the video real quick and just try to imagine what you think this horse is experiencing. Okay. Now, you could have heard the audio on that, it's very loud. You're going to the airport. There's a lot of clicking and clanking, people talking to the horse. These are completely new handlers. This horse is going from its home, again, going to the airport in a trailer, being loaded, offloaded, loaded again onto the airplane. Research shows for horses that are flying, the most stressful part for them is takeoff and landing, as you can imagine, for them to balance. And again, with Dr. Aaron to get some of that data, imagine that balance for them and what it's taking for them to do that. Then when they land, they're taken out again, a lot of clicking, clanking, very loud at an airport, getting on another trailer, and then going to the receiving center. That's stressful. That's incredibly stressful. Look at this list, and you can imagine what that horse is going through. So this stress, I think the point of today we're getting at is to recognize it is stressful for them. So what can we do to mitigate that? What can we do to help our equine companions withstand the stress and go, okay, and be able to thrive through it? So you can read all through that. And that transitions to Dr. Roddy.
Thanks, Dr. Chris. I think we can all imagine what it's like for those poor yearling thoroughbreds that are leaving their home farm and confronted with a number of different noises and temperatures and food and handlers, and then going to a sale, which is a stressful situation, and then traveling again and arriving somewhere at their final destination and expected to train and perform and look good because someone paid a lot of money for them. And I think sometimes we forget how much we put our horses through. I know when I travel myself, it takes me quite a long time to recover. And we often expect horses to just be perfect because we're at a show or we're at a competition or we've just purchased a new horse and we're expecting that horse to perform and behave how we expect. So I want to talk a little bit about how travel affects horses physiologically. And physiology is just a fancy word for what's going on inside of the animal. So we talk a lot about how horses behave, how they look, how they perform, but what's actually going on inside. And what we're learning so much about horses as we learn in humans is that what's going on inside reflects on what's going on outside. So stress in horses causes them to react in one of three ways. Either flight, they try to run away; fight, they try to interact with the people or the horses around them in an aggressive manner; or freeze. And freeze is one of the ones that I talk to a lot, because people tend to look at horses standing calmly or quietly, obediently doing what we ask them to, and assume that the horse has accepted this or is happy to do it. And often what we're seeing is a horse that is in freeze. They have been unable to flee. They have been unable to fight. They've been genetically selected to not do those things, or they've been trained to not do those things. And so they freeze. They may look obedient. They may look calm. They may even look happy because they're standing there looking at you and not reacting in any way. But inside, their body may still be in these flight or fight responses, and their body is going to be reacting, even if they're standing there calmly, even if they are happy. The physiological effects, the effects that are going on inside, are still happening, and they're still going to affect the horse's health in a number of ways. So that's what we kind of want to bring to everybody's attention. This is a great study. It's one of the studies that really changed the way I think about travel in horses. So when the horse is traveling, they need to continually adjust and readjust their balance. This is actually incredibly physically demanding on them and takes a lot of core strength, particularly the way that your truck or trailer or float is set up can really affect the way that the horse actually has to balance their body. Some horses like to lean against a wall. Some horses don't like to lean against a wall. And whether or not they have that option, whether or not they have the ability to actually spread their legs wide to get their balance, can really affect the toll that it takes on their body. So this is a little bit of a strange graph, but what it's actually showing is the horse's center of gravity as they're trying to maintain balance in a transport ride. And what the study showed is that just traveling for 1 hour, whether it's in a rural or a city setting, braking and turning, or just driving straight, the horse moved vertically 80 meters or 262 feet, and horizontally 230 meters or 754 feet. That is a lot of movement for what most people would say is relaxing for the horse or easy for the horse. Dr. Chris showed our horse going to the Circus Maximus in the van, and that horse was in the van in order to rest its energy so that it could then go and compete in the circus. But that horse was actually working very hard just to stand in the van. I often tell clients or first-time learners and drivers that the best way to learn how to haul is to go and stand in the back and let somebody else drive you around. And you become a much better hauler of horses when you've actually stood in the back yourself and felt how difficult it is to maintain your own balance. I compete my own show horses, and I have changed a lot about the way that I travel them now. I would almost never take a horse somewhere and expect it to perform on that day, simply because I know how physically draining it is for them to actually maintain their balance. And we need to think about, in particular in medicine, when we have horses that aren't fit horses or aren't competition horses and might be traveled for an emergency or a medical reason, how exhausting it's going to be for a horse without a lot of core strength, perhaps a broodmare in foal or an older horse that's been out in the field for a long time, to actually be put in a truck or a float or a trailer and taken to a hospital, especially if they're already sick. That's going to really compromise them physiologically. So how does the horse respond? What do we see as a physiological response to stress? We're going to see increased heart rate and respiratory rate. We're going to see elevated cortisol, and cortisol is the stress hormone, and then the other stress hormones in the body. We're actually going to see muscle enzyme leakage, because remember that for the horse, travel is exercise. Travel is not a rest. Most of my eventers actually treat the travel day as one of their gallop days. So they will skip a gallop set day on travel day, because that's how draining it is for the horse. That's how demanding of their muscle fitness the travel is. We're going to see rising body temperature and sweating. I saw a lot of questions about horses sweating when they're being transported, and that is definitely both a reaction to temperature, but also a reaction to their physiological stress. Another really interesting thing that we talk to a lot about stress in horses is that when horses are stressed, from evolution, the only reason they should be stressed is because they're fleeing a predator. So most of you have been to these webinars, have heard me give this analogy before. The horse runs from the lion and they make it or they don't. It's a short period of stress and it's over. They either survived and they go back to their herd dynamics, or they didn't survive and they're not stressed then either. When our horses are being transported for hours or sometimes even days or weeks, they're in that stress response for a long period of time. We start to call that chronic stress. While that stress is occurring, evolution has designed the horse's body to shunt blood away from the digestive tract, away from the reproductive tract, and actually send it to the muscles or the extremities. That affects their digestive system. That affects their reproductive system. That was designed in evolution to allow them to run away from the lion. It wasn't designed to go on for hours or days or weeks. And that will affect the horse's body. So a lot of people ask me, well, does duration of travel matter? We had a lot of questions about how long should I travel, how often? And the answer is that it's different. There are different consequences. There are different negative outcomes depending on the length of the trip. So some studies showed that a shorter trip was actually more stressful. So an hour trailer ride was more stressful at unloading than a 3-hour trip. And that's because the horses didn't have time to adjust to the travel. So they were never able to settle into their travel, and they stayed stressed the entire time. But then mid-duration trips are stressful in other ways. So there's that length of time balancing, the amount of strain on the core, the amount of strain on the muscles, the amount of strain on the horse's psychology as well, to have those loud sounds, to be in that confined space. You know, I find so many horses, I've dealt with a lot of horses that don't travel well, and people want them to be more and more enclosed. And I actually find that often if they can see more out the windows, if there's more airflow, if they have more access to the outside environment, they travel a lot better. And I believe that's because horses aren't used to not being able to see the sounds that they hear. We know they have really poor eyesight. Their eyesight is very different from us. When they're enclosed in a big truck and they're just hearing sounds without being able to visually identify them, that's really stressful. And remember that they want to flee, and they're confined in that truck. So they're hearing loud sounds. They can't identify where they're coming from. They want to flee. They can't flee. And that is very stressful for the horse. So they actually found that 300 kilometers or 185 miles of a trip was similar to a horse cantering for a mile. That's a pretty hard work for horses that aren't that fit. And a lot of us think nothing of traveling 185 miles. And I did it myself many, many, many times. 185 miles, no big deal. We'll get up at 3 a.m. We'll put the horses on the trailer. We'll get to the show. We'll get off. We'll tack them up. We'll go in the ring. It'll be great. We'll make our class. Never considering that the horses already cantered a mile before they even got there. And then we wonder why maybe they had a rail down, or they refused to jump, or they missed a lead, or they were anxious and not on the leg and not doing the things we want them to do. It's because they've already used up all of their reserves before they even got to the show. We also actually start to see changes. This is how physiology is affected by the stress of travel. So we start to see changes in the microbiome. We actually see that different levels of stress disrupt our hindgut microbiome. So just 1 hour of transport was enough to shift the microbiome towards our more lactic acid producing bacteria. So we saw an increase in our bad bacteria and a reduction in our good bacteria just after 1 hour of transport. After only 90 minutes of travel, we were seeing horses that showed changes in microbial richness and diversity in the hindgut. There are even studies that show it can take 4 to 5 days to see these changes reverse themselves. And that's just the stress of travel, let alone if we add competition or a new home or new feed or an illness on top of that. This is purely travel. And so that's what we're trying to get people to see and understand, is that your horse might load onto the trailer happily. They might stand there like an angel. They might unload at the show, and they might perform beautifully. And lots of horses do that. But inside, their microbiome is still changing. We are still seeing physiological and health effects based on the stress of travel, even if the horse appears to be coping with it psychologically perfectly or seems to be behaving perfectly. And even if they are not behaving perfectly, we need to remember that that's not necessarily this horse misbehaving or this horse being naughty or arrogant or difficult or even green. When we see changes in the microbiome, we see less fiber digestion. That means that the horses don't have as much energy. Remember that horses get 80% of their energy from fiber and forage. No matter what you feed them, 80% of the energy produced comes from their fiber and their forage. And that is extracted in the hindgut. So as soon as we start to see changes in the hindgut, we start to see less fiber digestion. That means our horse has less energy to perform. They're going to get tired more easily. They're going to be less focused. We're also going to see an increase in lactic acid production because we have those bad bacteria producing more lactic acid. that increases the risk of hindgut acidosis. It increases the risk of colic, laminitis, and lactic acid buildup also affects our muscles and our horse's ability to perform and recover, particularly at multi-day shows or at a sale where they're there for multiple days, or if they're traveling for multiple days. How many people travel for 8 hours and then spend the night overnight and then travel for 8 hours the next day? If you're going from California to Florida or Western Australia to Sydney, this could go on for day after day after day, and the horse isn't really getting a chance to recover. So we're seeing their muscles being affected, their body being affected. We're seeing their hindgut microbiome being affected. And then we're disappointed when they arrive at their final destination and they don't look well or they don't behave well. And it's not the horse's fault. It is really the stress affecting their body. We also need to remember that stress disrupts gut motility. So we have less digestion, we have a change in motility, we're definitely going to have reduced energy for performance. And we're going to have those microbiome shifts that can impair nutrient absorption. And that's going to limit the horse's stamina, and it's going to limit their ability to recover and perform for us day after day after day. I know in myself, I've seen horses not perform well on the day that they arrive. And I've also seen horses that do really well the first day or the second day. And by the third day, we simply don't have a horse left. And that's because of the change in physiology. It might have nothing to do with your fitness regime or your diet. It's simply the horse being affected by the stress of travel. And it's just something we want to bring to everybody's attention. It's certainly not to say that we can't travel our horses, but we just want to think about how we can do it better. Over time, these changes in the microbiome can manifest in long-term and actually pretty severe changes. So if you're someone who's traveling week in, week out, or again, if we have a horse that's traveling a particularly long distance, I actually brought 3 horses myself from Australia to the US, and they were in transit for nearly 3 weeks all up. They actually went from Sydney on a truck to Melbourne. They then flew to Hanoi. They then flew to the Netherlands. They then flew to Chicago. They were in quarantine for a week in Chicago, and then they were put on a truck and came down to Florida. And now, knowing what we know, I'm amazed that they were alive when they got there. The amount of stress that those horses went through, different handlers, different environment, different feed, different water, the sounds, the smells, the disruption in their routine, it definitely affects their body and it affects their microbiome. And over time, that change in the microbiome, which is what the term dysbiosis means, it's a negative change in the microbiome, that results in outward changes that we can see: dull coat, weight loss, lethargic behavior, looser running manure, not wanting to eat and drink. Remember, the microbiome controls the hormones that make a horse want to eat and drink, loss of top line, and then obviously leaky gut, which can lead to all sorts of systemic inflammation and disease. This is happening while our horse is traveling. Even if our horse stands like an absolute angel and loads and unloads with the rope tossed over their neck, this is still happening inside. And so it's something that we have to think about, and it's something we have to protect our horses from, because we're doing this to them. They aren't choosing to go on the trailer, even though they walk on there happily. We're asking this of them and they're doing it for us, but we need to do our best, and it's in their interest and in ours to keep them healthy. So dysbiosis certainly shows up in the physical signs that we saw, but it can also show up in performance. So refusing fences, picking up the wrong lead, not moving well, incessant crying out, not settling, rearing, bucking. All of those things can be signs that the stomach or the hindgut aren't happy. And so I think we all need to remember that when we get to the show and our horse is showing these signs, they're not necessarily being naughty or misbehaving. They're actually not feeling well. And we're asking them to give their all athletically when they're not feeling their best inside. And we have to be sympathetic to that. And we also need to prepare for that, because training and competing horses is expensive. It's a lot of money invested, a lot of energy invested, a lot of time and effort invested. And we want to be able to guarantee the outcome as much as possible. And there's a lot that we can do to improve things.
Dr. Erin, can I just quickly jump in? I'm so glad that you reinforced that point, because over and over we hear people say the horse is arrogant, it's best being difficult. And as horse owners, it's time for us to go, no, they're not being difficult, they're in pain. How do they communicate to us? So again, there's so many take-home messages from this webinar, but that's the one that I'd love to, just reinforce. Share it with your friends. Let them know that our horses are showing up with all those performance issues because of pain and because of dysbiosis. It's not they're just trying to be difficult. So thank you for reinforcing that. And I know you will keep doing that during the webinar.
Absolutely. And it's certainly a lesson that I've learned myself. I have I have been my own victim of trying to push horses too far because it was more convenient for my schedule or for the show schedule or for what I had going on. And you only have yourself to blame when you're disappointed. You can't blame the horse. We can never blame the horse. But when we don't respect their body and we don't respect their health and we don't understand, which we didn't before these studies came out, how much the horse was being impacted inside, even though they looked as if they were calm and happy and relaxed about travel. A lot of those videos that we got to see of the horses flying were actually championship horses, Olympic horses. Those horses travel on planes regularly. They're on planes multiple times a year, year in, year out. One of those horses had been to 3 or 4 championships, so had flown all around the world, happily loads in the crate, stands in the crate, eats well, drinks well, unloads. You know, for these horses, they are frequent flyers. They're punching their frequent flyer miles, and they do it all without breaking a sweat because they're used to it. But their bodies are being affected. So even if they do all the right things, that change in the microbiome, the change in their muscles, the intense core exercise that we're asking them to perform, that is still happening, and we can't take that away. As we get into longer trips, obviously the outcomes change. So we see a lot more stress-related behavior in horses that are traveling. There's actually a really interesting study that I love where they took 2 groups of horses. They traveled one group for 12 hours and the other group stood in stocks, so restrained with their heads tied up for 12 hours. And they then switched the groups. So the horses that were tied up were in the exact same physical position as the horses that were traveling, but they weren't actually traveling. The horses that were traveling, both times, both groups, showed a significant increase in stress-related behavior versus the horses that were tied up. They showed significant physiological changes, reduction in their ability to balance, reduction in gut motility, increase in gastric ulcer severity. So it really is the travel. It's not the position of the body. It's not being off of food and water. It's not being confined. It is actually the act of traveling that is causing these outcomes. And as our trips get longer and longer, the outcomes get more severe. Once we go to 24 hours, we're actually seeing horses lose up to 6% of their body weight in a 24-hour trip. We see a significant increase in lactic acid buildup in muscles, a significant increase in muscle enzyme buildup. And these are similar to markers of those of endurance horses after a competition. So a horse that has traveled for 24 hours looks the same physiologically as a horse that has finished a long-term endurance race. And these horses haven't hardly taken any steps, right? They've just stood there, but their body has been affected as if they had been ridden for 100 miles. And this is when we can start to see actually really severe physiological effects. And that's what Dr. Tiffany's going to talk about.
Thank you, Dr. Aaron. So I was really surprised to learn in preparing for this presentation that in one survey, only 10% of owners in Australia reported having experienced colic with their horses following transport. That's surprising to me because as a vet in Ocala, Florida, my perception is that to travel is to colic. And obviously that's a biased perception, but it's based on the number of calls that we receive pertaining to colic, particularly around the time of year when horses are traveling in the greatest numbers from Canada and the northeastern United States to Ocala, Florida, in order to compete in their winter show circuits. Or as Dr. Chris mentioned, following the Keeneland September sale that's happening right now, many of those horses will be shipped to Florida in order to be broke and turned around and sold as 2-year-olds in training. And so we do see a lot of colic following transport in these horses for all the reasons that Dr. Aaron discussed. In this session, we are going to talk about how do we get from travel to various gastrointestinal disturbance presentations. And first up is diarrhea. So one survey out of Germany found that 34% of German horse owners observed diarrhea in their horses associated with travel. Now, oftentimes that's a stress diarrhea. And the reason we see that is because the adrenaline associated with the stress of transport can result in a temporary increase in gastrointestinal motility, leading to that diarrhea. It might also demonstrate cramping associated with that increased gastrointestinal motility. And it should be a transient diarrhea. It's not something, that's a really profound diarrhea, but you might see some diarrhea on the trailer when you go to unload, or perhaps some diarrhea in those first 12 to 24 hours after transport. But it can contribute to dehydration. Other factors contributing to dehydration is a decrease in drinking behavior, as Dr. Aaron mentioned as well. Now, why do our horses stop drinking? Well, one is the stress. So stressed horses aren't eating, so stressed horses aren't going to drink, because that is what drives their thirst, is the intake of roughage. They may have reduced access to water, which we'll address as we talk about how to prevent these scenarios from happening. And there's something we often don't think about, which is the change in how the water tastes. So, the water in New England does not taste the same as the water in Central Florida. And I'm sure the same can be true about various geographies in Australia. That can affect some horses quite a bit, and they'll refuse to eat or drink during that time period. Now, initially, when horses stop taking in water, we spare blood perfusion to our organs by drawing water from the gastrointestinal tract, which can dry out the GI contents. As perfusion worsens, so our blood volume worsens, our dehydration worsens, then we get a drawing of the blood system or the blood flow away from the gastrointestinal tract, which can result in a sequence of events that will ultimately lead to leaky gut syndrome. This dehydration, however, as we mentioned, and the drawing of fluid from the gastrointestinal tract will ultimately result in impactions for you and an impaction colic. Secondarily, you'll get prolonged transit time of the feed, which will result in shifts in the microbiome, gas buildup, which might result in colonic displacements. And we actually know from research that your odds of developing colonic obstruction or impaction and gas colic is 3 times greater if your horse is transported in the previous 24 hours than if it has not. And this video here is just showing a group resolving an impaction surgically through an enterotomy site. Gastric ulcers, always a big topic in our horse world. And how do we get to gastric ulcers associated with travel? Because I think we all recognize that our horses seem to develop ulcers following travel associated with going to the show. Again, this is all stress related, partially because we have a reduction in the availability of feed to them as you're traveling, and they aren't wanting to eat because they're stressed in some situations. This reduced feed consumption results in, again, a shift in the microbiome of the hindgut and decreased production of B vitamins. But the lack of the fiber and forage in their stomach can increase acid splash. They can also experience delayed gastric emptying. And again, as the perfusion or dehydration worsens as we go along, then you're going to have decreased perfusion to tissues, and that will ultimately contribute to our glandular ulcers rather than the ulcers created by acid splash in our squamous mucosa. This slide, I asked our IT and marketing people to create for me just to scare you even more about everything that can happen with our horses as we're traveling and stressing them. So you can see that it's pretty much a feedback loop here. So our horses, get on and we ask them to transport. They have reduced GI motility, restricted water access, restricting their feed. This is going to combine and lead to potentially impactions. Ultimately, an impaction will lead to dysbiosis. Restricting their feed and less fiber fermentation will also lead to dysbiosis. So shifts in their microbiome is what we're referring to in dysbiosis. The psychological stress alone can result in decreased feed intake and decreased water intake without restriction, even if you're offering it to them. And of course, can alter the microbiome itself through direct action of cortisol on our bacteria and protozoa in the hindgut. This can then lead to maldigestion, meaning we're not processing our nutrients that we offer them appropriately. decreased B vitamins, which then feed back again in a negative feedback loop. And you end up with less water intake, less feed intake, and the cycle just continues. And along with the microbiome is where we get into those long-term effects that Dr. Aaron mentioned, where we're no longer absorbing our nutrients, and we may even develop chronic diarrhea or severe diarrhea. So shifts in microbiome, for example, can be associated with development of severe acute diarrhea. And one study observing the risk factors of salmonella shedding in our horses found that horses that had to transport over 1 hour to a referral hospital for colic were 3 times as likely to test positive for salmonellosis as those horses who traveled less than 1 hour. Again, this is associated with shifts in our microbiome. The good bacteria die off, the bad bacteria proliferate. So what are the warning signs and what can you do in order to avoid seeing someone like me? Warning signs, one of the most obvious, of course, is that your horse arrives sweating and agitated. Clearly, that's outward signs of stress, which most of ours don't always show us. You can also see a reduction in appetite, water intake. Maybe they're not passing as much manure as they normally would, or you notice the consistency has changed. Our standard is to say that most horses should pass at least 5 piles of normal road apple piles of manure every 24 hours. So you see a reduction in that type of manure, or you see dry, firm manure, anything that's mucus covered, that's an indication that you could potentially have an impending colic on your hands. There are obvious signs, piling, flank biting, your general colic signs, and then of course with prolonged repeated exposure to travel stress and the effects of dysbiosis and shifts in the microbiome, you might see lethargy, weight loss, or a dull coat. So again, what can you do to reduce the risk factors? So this is something that Dr. Aaron and Dr. Chris are going to go into much more in depth, but a few things that you can just do along the way is addressing hydration and feed intake as best you can before you travel, making sure you stop to allow water intake and for them to lower their heads during the travel, and then encouraging them to go for a walk or have free turnout once you arrive at your destination, monitoring for appropriate feed intake, specifically of forage or roughage when you arrive. And again, as we mentioned, monitoring for all those signs. And yes, there are supplements that we can give to help mitigate the negative effects of stress on the physiology in your horse. And Dr. Aaron is going to begin talking about those.
Thank you, Dr. Tiffany. As much as we like you, I really don't want to bring my horses to come see you. So we're going to help the people and ourselves avoid going to see Dr. Tiffany. She's a lot of fun to go see for dinner, but you don't want to go see her at the hospital. So we are going to try to help you because, as we all know, we love our horses. Many of us love to compete them or just travel with them for fun, or sometimes we just don't have a choice. We're moving to a new barn. We've purchased a new horse. I moved here from Australia and I wanted to bring my 3 beloved horses with me. So as much as I know that trip was hard on them, and there are certainly things I could do better, and one of the reasons we're doing this webinar, sometimes travel is a part of life. And as much as we need to take it seriously and we need to be empathetic to the horse, we still want to do it. And so our goal is to make it as stress-free on our horses as possible. So how can we protect the gut? Obviously, we've spoken about feeding our horses, making sure that they're well fed ahead of time, making sure that they're hydrated ahead of time. But we also need to really focus on the resiliency of our microbiome and the protection of the GI tract as much as possible. So our 2 supplements, Digestive HP and Stress Paste, have been designed specifically to do exactly that, to help increase the resiliency of the microbiome and to protect the GI tract as much as possible. That's the goal. That's what we're here to do. So let's talk about the stomach first, because it comes first in line as we travel down the GI tract. So in the stomach, as Dr. Tiffany spoke about, our biggest risk is going to be gastric ulcers. So whether or not we're providing food in the trailer, and there were so many questions about that, my personal belief is I want food in front of horses all the time. Yes, there is a risk of choke when feeding a horse while traveling. In my experience, horses that choke in the trailer also choke in real life. standing in their stall or eating in their field. So personally, I have food in front of horses all the time. If you're truly worried about choke, wetting the feed or making sure the feed is hung at a correct height and given to the horse in a way that they can't bolt it are ways of mitigating choke. But the other thing I would say is that resolving a choke is also much easier and less stressful on the horse than that surgical enterotomy that Dr. Tiffany showed us. So for me, if it is a risk of impaction or risk of a surgical colic or a risk of choke, I'm going to take choke every time. But I have been traveling horses my whole life all over the world, and I have yet to have a travel choke on my hands. So feed them all the time, keep food in front of them. Now, that doesn't mean that they will eat it. We know we can lead a horse to water. That doesn't mean we can make it drink, except that we can with stress-paced and digestive HP. So by maintaining the coating of the stomach, by buffering the gastric acid, both in the short term and in the long term, we are keeping that stomach comfortable. When you keep the stomach comfortable, you keep the horse eating. You also keep the horse relaxed. When my stomach hurts, I'm not happy. When horses' stomachs hurts, they're not happy. That is going to start that is going to start wanting food and not wanting to take on water. They teach us in vet school, and everyone thinks vet school is really fancy and complicated. They teach us things like when horses stop eating, they die. And that's true, unfortunately. When horses stop, the entire GI tract goes into a negative feedback loop. And ultimately, that will often result in a serious colic. So keeping that stomach happy by neutralizing the gastric acid and coating the stomach with the stress paste makes all the difference in the world. Horses actually wanting to stay eating and drinking. And that would first start keeping them eating, but also protecting against ulcers. We also want to protect that hindgut microbiome. I think Dr. Tiffany's chart is amazing, and I wish we'd had that taught me in vet school. It would have helped me a lot, but she only came up with it now. So we're getting new stuff all the time. But that feedback loop of dysbiosis, once we start having negative effects that result in dysbiosis, that is really hard for the horse to come back from. We saw that study where 1 hour of travel affected the hindgut in a negative way for 4 to 5 days. And that only compounds as we increase the duration of travel and we increase the duration of cushion or being in a new home, or perhaps we've had to evacuate for sort of weather disaster, or we've had a change in feed. That continuous increase in dysbiosis will negatively affect the horse. So the most important thing we can do is to protect the hindgut microbiome. We do that with pre and postbiotics. Those are the food for the good bacteria, and they're also the metabolites that increase the beneficial juice. I like to think of it as the soup that the good bacteria sit in. The metabolites make them happy. They increase their ability to make volatile fatty acids and B vitamins, the good things that horses need to keep eating and drinking. We also include betaine. Betaine is an osmolyte, and that's just a fancy word that is something that loves water. Betaine loves water. It keeps that cell hydration, and it helps mitigate against those effects that Dr. Tiffany and I spoke about, where the horse's body is actually designed to pull blood out of the GI tract, direct it to tissues, direct it to the extremities. That's the design of the body. We can actually hijack that design by using betaine, keeping the fluid in the GI tract. That reduces hindgut stress, and it maintains a good microbiome and a good lining of the wall of the GI tract, which helps prevent against leaky gut. We also include B vitamins. We've spoken about B vitamins a lot, and they're a lot more important than people think. They absolutely do influence calm behavior and focus and the horse's ability to perform, but they are also one of the major drivers of eating and thus drinking behavior. So by including extra B vitamins, we actually encourage horses to keep eating and drinking. And like we say, a horse stops eating, they die. So keeping them eating is the most important part. That's in the stress pace. The digestive HP has our pre and postbiotics as well, the alfalfa or lucerne leaf meal, the enzyme blends, and then the Elitox mycotoxin binder. And what's really important for me in a mycotoxin binder in stress is that as we have a stressed horse, their ability to cope with inflammation, their ability to cope with the onset of disease or the onset of mycotoxicosis is decreased. So by keeping those toxins out of the bloodstream, we reduce the inflammation overload on the horse, and we allow them to cope better with stress for a longer period of time. So what we're doing is we're actually looking at every part of the GI tract, how it's affected physiologically by this stress, and we're helping to support and protect against those effects.
Dr. Erin, can I just jump in quickly? For people in New Zealand and Australia that are saying that they're using EQ and stress pace, that's brilliant. But I just wanted to jump in and say that if you are traveling your horse, competing your horse, if your horse is under more regular stress, then we would recommend that you use digestive HP. It was developed in response to the fact that we know the more stress horses are under, the more they are prone to dysbiosis. So again, fabulous at using EQ, and EQ is the right product for so many horses. But if you are traveling, competing, and your horse is under more stress, we would highly recommend that you switch to HP. It has got, more postbiotics, more amino acids, etc. So just that, and just one other thing I wanted to mention is back to stress pace when Dr. Erin was talking about supporting and buffering the stomach. There is another ingredient that we didn't include on the slide, which is pectin, and it actually does create a really nice alkaline gel to protect the stomach from acid splash, particularly in times off feed. So I just want to jump in and throw that in as well.
Yep, no, absolutely, Linda. I appreciate all of that. And actually, for some history of Poseidon product development, back in the day, us OG used to double or triple dose EQ because we didn't have HP, and that was one of the driving factors. So when I was traveling horses in the beginning, or I was recommending to clients that were going to travel horses, we would recommend a stress dose of EQ, which was doubling or tripling the dose. And then we realized we were doing that so frequently that we needed to create a more concentrated product. And that's where HP was born from, was from a need for a more concentrated product to protect horses that are undergoing this kind of stress more regularly. And again, back in the day, I'll be aging myself, we used to get horses at competitions and they wouldn't eat or drink. And I knew that EQ could make the horse eat or drink, but I am a very good horse trainer. I actually pride myself on my secret skill is I can load any horse onto a trailer, give me 20 minutes. And I have won a lot of bets with this skill. I cannot make a horse eat that doesn't want to eat. So I used to mix a stress dose of EQ with some mineral oil, and I would shove it down a horse's throat that wouldn't eat at a show. And that is messy and it is not fun. And that was one of the things that we said to Linda. We said, Linda, this is the best product in the world, but we need it in a paste, because when a horse gets to a show and they don't want to eat or drink, it's really hard to mix this powder with oil and force it down their throat. So that was one of the driving factors of creating stress pace, is that when you do find yourself in those situations, and we've all been in those situations where a horse has not reacted well to travel, or a new horse has arrived to us and they're not reacting well, and being able to give them that stress pace in that immediate crisis situation, it makes all the difference in the world. And if I could have filled this whole webinar with time-lapse videos of horses that didn't want to eat or drink, and we gave them a stress pace, and normally it's 17 or 18 minutes, and they are absolutely in the food bowl and they are drinking, and you just know that you've stopped that cycle. And that comes down to all of these factors: coating the stomach, making the stomach comfortable, getting those B vitamins in their system, getting the pre and postbiotics, helping the hindgut microbiome, that entire GI tract being happy and comfortable. And we just stop that horrible chart that Dr. Tiffany made for us, which I'm really glad I didn't have to memorize in vet school. We stop it. And we get the horses going back in the right direction. We get them eating, we get them drinking, and we start to repair this damage that we've caused. So Dr. Tiffany spoke a lot about leaky gut and the long-term consequences that we can see of leaky gut. Remember, that can lead to systemic inflammation that can result in a lot of different things in the horse. I see horses with joint infections. I see horses with lung infections. I see horses with long-term allergies that have started as leaky gut, because once we get a breakdown in the lining of our GI tract, inflammation goes into the bloodstream and it ends up somewhere. We don't know where it will end up. It will just end up somewhere. So reinforcing the gut lining is really important. That's why we include such high levels of amino acids in our products. Not only do they prevent leaky gut by reinforcing the gut lining, they actually allow gut tissue to heal. Amino acids are really important for the healing of gut tissue. So they're actually preventing gastric ulcers as well, and they're preventing damage to the hindgut as well, because they are giving the gut fuel to actually heal itself. Antioxidants, we include vitamin C and vitamin E in stress pace. So those are our fat-based and our water-based antioxidants, and they're shown in research to go down in horses that are stressed. They don't absorb them as well, they don't produce them as well, and that can lead to both oxidative damage and also immune issues, sickness in our horses when they're traveling. So we include those. We spoke about the B vitamins a lot. B vitamins do so much in the horse. And as we've said, when we go back to the core of it, horses were not designed to undergo chronic stress. Their system wasn't designed to undergo short bursts of stress, and then either you made it or you didn't. So these are all systems in the horse. The inability to produce B vitamins when they're stressed, the change in the microbiome when they're stressed. It's a system that the horse is not designed to cope with our domestication practices and what we want to do with them. So it's our job to provide them with the support so that they can cope and they can go to the shows and they can compete and they can change homes and they can be bought and sold and they can do all the amazing things that these creatures can do. But we need to support their GI tract so that we reap the benefits and they reap the benefits of being a healthy, happy horse that wants to give it their all, because they really do. So digestive HP, that's the complete gut health supplement that was born of the stress dose of EQ. We're like, this is too many scoops of EQ. We need something that's more concentrated. So this is every day. You're going to slowly introduce it over 2 weeks. I like to feed it 2 or 3 times a day. Sometimes if I have a particularly gastric ulcer prone horse, or particularly at shows where horses are going to be confined for long periods of time, I will actually feed HP in 3 meals a day, because you're going to get more extended buffering that way. Ideally, we like to start HP 3 or 4 weeks before you're going to travel. I think any horse that travels regularly or any horse that is building up to a travel trip should be on HP, and you're going to see the best effects if you start that a few weeks ahead of time. So we'd like to keep our horses on this product all the time. And particularly if you know you're traveling, I recommend to a lot of my clients now that import horses from Europe or import horses from Australia, or even we often sell horses from the US to Australia. We start them on HP at least a month before they're going to make that trip, so that they have that support on board. You know, worst case scenario, you start it as soon as you get the horse, but if you can start it before, you're just going to ease that transition and reduce the effect of travel stress on them. So HP is every day. The difference for me in this product versus all the other products on the market is that it is complete. It is one product that does everything. And again, we've showed a lot of science in this presentation. And for us, it is all about the science. It is about active ingredients at effective levels that are backed by research, that are actually going to work and do what they say they're going to do. So many products on the market don't include active levels. They don't include active ingredients. They don't include them in effective levels, or they have one active ingredient and a bunch of fillers. That's marketing. That's salesy. That's not actually doing the best by your horse. So putting everything together at the level that it should be, that's actually going to make a difference. And like we said, when we knew that we needed to give more EQ, we made a stronger product for these horses that do travel a lot, that are stressed a lot. And then stress paste, again, was born of the mess of trying to mix a powder and an oil and give it to a horse that didn't want to eat. But besides just doing that, we wanted to look at what else can we put in this product that is actually going to help horses physiologically. Because the psychological effects of stress, the not performing, the not eating, the not drinking, the being unsettled, the calling out, the pacing the stall, the trying to escape, the pulling back, the running away, those are all the horse just trying to show you that physiologically they don't feel well. Physiologically, their stomach hurts. Physiologically, their hindgut is in dysbiosis. Physiologically, they're not coping with what's going on. Those outward behaviors are just an expression of the internal physiology. So being able to address those physiological effects is going to result in a much better horse psychologically, a horse that performs well, a horse that eats and drinks, a horse that is calm, a horse that is able to recover. So my tried and true stress paced travel tips: you're going to give a full dose of stress paste, a full serving the night before you travel. And then you're going to give another serving 30 minutes before loading. And then I like to give it every 4 hours for trips over 4 hours. When I'm at a competition or when I've gotten the horse to its new home, I'll generally give stress paste twice a day for the duration of the competition, or for the first 3 to 5 days of being in a new place. And you can judge that. You actually can't ever give stress paste wrong. So some horses will need more and some horses will need it longer. If you've got a horse somewhere and they're just not adjusting, you can keep going with that stress paste. I've had horses on stress paste for 2 weeks before, if it takes them that long to adjust, and sometimes it does. But my tried and true is start the night before and then give it 2 or 3 times a day. every day while traveling or competing. And then I even like to continue a few days after, because we know that that microbiome is still adjusting after. We know that those B vitamin levels are still going to be reactive after this travel stress. So supporting the horse in recovery is going to allow them to bounce back better, and they'll be ready for the next show or the next trip or whatever their next thing is.
Dr. Erin, sorry, just jumping in again. I'm noticing people are asking questions about calming pace, and we get asked this a lot because stress pace is not a calming pace. Do you want to respond to that, please?
Yeah, I would love to respond to that. So I actually don't believe in calming pace. There's some fundamental flaws with calming pace. The number one flaw for me is most of them contain tryptophan. Tryptophan is actually not proven scientifically to work in the horse. There has been one study on tryptophan in horses, and it actually showed it made horses spookier and more reactive. Another calming ingredient in a calming paste is melatonin. Melatonin has not been shown to be bioavailable in the horse or to affect the horse in the way that it affects humans. For me, from a horsemanship perspective, trying to calm or sedate your horse for competition or for riding isn't good horsemanship or good sportsmanship. So what we're trying to do with stress paste is, again, affect those physiological causes of stress and the physiological effects of stress. So we are coating the stomach, we're preventing gastric discomfort, we are increasing the resiliency of the microbiome to help prevent dysbiosis, and then we're replacing the ingredients in the horse that we see lost in stress. Now, we do have magnesium in stress paste. Magnesium is really important for its buffering and also for the function of nerve and muscle tissue. And we all know that if a horse is deficient in magnesium, they can be more reactive. So by making sure that we're including magnesium at the appropriate level, we are preventing that deficiency. We also have a full suite of B vitamins, and B vitamins really help horses focus. It is the lack of B vitamins that can often make horses spooky and reactive. That being said, most people that I work with, and I work with hundreds, if not thousands of people now using stress paste, tell me that they have the ride of their life on stress paste. Stress paste is worth 10,000 perfect preps. They've gotten rid of all of their calming supplements. I haven't used a calming supplement. I mean, if I could get back all the money that I spent on calming supplements, I would be a very happy person. But we were doing it all wrong. We were reading the horse as being reactive, as being naughty, as being hyper, as being anxious. They aren't those things. They are physiologically stressed. They do not feel well. They are effectively unwell. Trying to sedate someone who is unwell is going about it the wrong way. We need to prevent them from feeling that way, and we need to protect them from feeling that way. And when you do that, you get a horse that is happy, healthy, focused, but still has the energy to do what they need to do. And it's just been a misunderstanding of what the horse was presenting to us. The horse wasn't upset because they were in a new environment necessarily. They were upset because their body wasn't reacting to that new environment well. And we have to remember that our horses are prey animals. So when they become upset, they want to flee. That's what evolution tells them to do. When we keep them from being upset, when we keep them feeling well, then they want to do what we want them to do. That's the cool thing about horses. They just keep wanting to do what we want them to do. And that's why, they went on all those trips and the ships and the planes and the van, and they went to the circus because they want to do what we want them to do. So it's just about thinking about it from a different perspective.
Thank you, Dr. Erin. Appreciate that. What I would love to hear with all the people that have joined us today, if you have used stress paste, please share in the chat what changes you noticed, whether you use it again and why. We love to hear about your experiences. But thank you for explaining that, Dr. Erin. That was brilliant.
Absolutely. I've gone through the supplements and what they do and how they do it. And now Dr. Chris is going to give us some more tips that we can help protect our horses and protect ourselves so we can all have fun when we're out there on the road.
Yep. No, that was great. And the questions I was furiously trying to answer, there's 74 as I look at it now. This is what Dr. Erin, Dr. Tiffany, and I do after the webinar. We'll go back and try to answer all your questions. But a lot of them we have been answering as we've gone, and some of them are in this next section that I'm going to present. The one that kept coming up that I don't address directly is the type of trailer. And the research that's emerging is the best way for horses to travel in a trailer or float is actually backwards, right? Rear facing. And we know that's probably not reasonable because all of our trailers are forward facing, but herringbone trailers or the angled trailers also, that's kind of where we've I think in the industry around the world has said, okay, that's our compromise. So there is some research that shows if they are at an angle, they will travel better. They just have a better way of balancing, and it's less physical on them. So that's the only thing I didn't have in these slides, and that was a very common question. So hopefully that answers some of it. But again, it's an area of research that's still emerging. The people around the world are looking at. One thing that came up was omeprazole, and you can read about omeprazole, look at some of the concerns, especially on bone health. Omeprazole does, stop or very limit stomach acid production, so there is concerns with it. As far as one of the things, especially as a nutritionist point of view, is acid rebound. So because that stomach acid's been suppressed, when you take them off omeprazole, the stomach gets really acidic, and again, they can be more vulnerable to that ulcer reoccurrence. People are using this all the time now, thinking that it's going to help with stress, but it does have a place with your veterinarian. But just be aware that, unlike what Dr. Aaron said with stress paste, that's something you can give to help the horse withstand that. Omeprazole is a medication for stomach ulcers. So I wouldn't be using that as a calming paste or a stress paste like we see with some people.
So, Dr. Chris, I just
Yes.
know, particularly when I was in the US with Dr. Erin, that a lot of people were giving omeprazole the day before travel, and
Yep.
it was just a widespread common practice. And I know that we've had lots of chats about this, and Dr. Erin might want to also join in. I know it happens in Australia as well. What I love is that people know they need to do something and they're being very proactive. But what I'm concerned about is they may not realize the the fact that it's probably not the best choice for traveling the day before travel.
Yeah, so I'm happy to jump in and speak to that quickly. I think that there's some confusion amongst the horse community about how omeprazole actually works. And omeprazole certainly doesn't coat the stomach, and it doesn't reduce stomach pain. So using omeprazole the day before travel, or in an acute case of a horse not wanting to eat or a horse colic, the drug really doesn't work that way. So we need to give omeprazole for 4 to 5 days before we actually start to see a result in the horse. And the result that we're seeing is actually turning off the pumps that make the acid in the horse's stomach. So that drug is designed to be given for 28 days to stop acid production so that we can see a healing of gastric ulcers. And in terms of squamous ulceration, it does work really well in that instance. That 28 days is designed to give us time to make changes in diet or management to reduce acid splash in the horse. So that's the use of omeprazole. That's how it's designed to be used. That's how we prescribe it. A lot of people that I talk to think that omeprazole is Pepto-Bismol and that it's going to coat the stomach and make it feel better. And that isn't what it does. That is what stress paste does. So if you're looking for a Pepto-Bismol type effect, if you're looking for coating, if you're looking for soothing of the stomach, you're much better off looking for an alkaline gel like we have in stress paste than for using omeprazole. If you do want to use omeprazole in order to reduce acid, you need to do that with your veterinarian. You need to make sure you start 4 to 5 days in advance. You need to give it on an empty stomach. And personally, I no longer recommend that for travel because I don't want horses to have an empty stomach. And we also see that acid rebound effect. So now that we have ingredients like pectin and like magnesium, and we can make an alkaline gel, we no longer need to lean on these sort of old medications. So personally, I've gotten away from using omeprazole completely, except in the case of acute squamous ulceration. And I like to maybe treat once and never treat again. So it's something we're really trying to educate the public about, that these drugs do have drawbacks. They do have side effects, particularly as Dr. Chris spoke about in terms of absorbing nutrients, and that we can do better now with the new science that's out there. And that's one of the really cool things about stress paste.
Thanks, Dr. Erin.
Yep. Yep. It's always good. It's always good. Okay, so some of the things you've been asking about, what to do pre-travel, during travel, length of travel. So we're going to address that here. Some tips that you can write down or have access to. And by the way, you'll have access to this video, so you can always go back and rewatch it if you missed something. But pre-travel, hydration, hydration, hydration. Try to allow that horse to drink as much as they want. Because dehydration is the one that we're really concerned with, especially traveling in the spring and summer. And that's where we get, with the horse not drinking as much, that means less fluid in the gut. That means less motility of all of the digesta in there, and that's where we start seeing risks of colic, and then obviously heat stress or dehydration. Forage, forage, forage. Always, we want forage in that stomach. We don't want that stomach empty, with that acid splashing like Dr. Aaron just talked about. That if we keep the horse eating hay, they're going to be producing saliva. They're going to be producing saliva that helps buffer the stomach, and then we're going to have some gut fill in there. So we want to make sure we have forage available to the horse pre-travel, and then we'll talk about during travel because that was a common question. Avoid large grain meals. High sugar, high starch can lead to spikes in acidity of the stomach. I see it in other supplements too, that they're all grain based. Those are things you want to try to avoid because they're going to increase the acidity in the stomach and can lead to digestive upset. Sorry, wrong button there. That one. All right, one of the things is make sure your horse is just ready to go. Unless you're going to the vet or vet hospital emergencies, been there, done that, trying to get a horse in a trailer and to the vet hospital. But horses that are just not eating, they seem colicky, they're really stressed out, maybe it's worth skipping that show because you don't want to put them at risk. So just make sure they're normal behavior and they're ready to go. Then you can just check, make sure they're eating. You can look at their manure. Hydration, you can do the skin pinch test. That still works, to see if they're dehydrated or not. If that skin doesn't go back within a couple seconds, that could be an indication of dehydration. So that's one way we can easily check there. So make sure your horse is ready. Then we want to check our setup. Is our trailer serviceable? Look at the tires, check the flooring, because we do have wooden floor floats or trailers that can rot over time. Horses' legs can go through there. So you want to make sure the trailer is serviceable. Ventilation is very important. I'm going to have some pro tips here in a second on how you can monitor that during your travel, but it can be upwards of 20 degrees, 18 degrees Fahrenheit hotter in the trailer or 10 degrees Celsius than it is outside. And so your horse is really hot in there, already working. We know that. Again, that slide Dr. Aaron showed was fantastic. How they balance. So they are working. They're going to be sweating a little bit. And then it's hot in there. That's where it gets stressful. Another common question many of you are asking is, do we want the head up? Because back in the day, going a few decades, we always tied the horses' heads up while we were traveling, thinking we wanted them, not to bang their heads or get injured, especially their eyes. Now we know that's not good. That's very stressful. And actually, to mimic stress in research studies, we actually use that tying the horse's head up high to mimic stress of travel. We want the horse to be able to lower their head, so that gives them some flexibility in their neck and muscles, but also clears the airways. So we want to offer hay during the trip, at least chest level, or it could be a little bit lower. I talked about the flooring. Bedding, general suggestion, less than 2 hours, you don't need it. But if you're going for long hauls, you may want to provide some bedding just to give them a little bit of cushion, but make sure it's low dust shavings, or you can use pellets because dust is a concern. And again, unless your vet directs it, don't use tranquilizers or anything like that because the horse could get injured.
I just want to jump in quickly, Dr. Chris. Sorry to interrupt. We had a few
No, no,
questions
okay.
come in about straight versus angle versus do they really need to change their float? And I think one of the things that we're often missing, if you don't mind going back one slide, just to the image of the horses in a straight load float.
Yep.
What's hard for horses about a straight load float is that they actually need to be able to get their leg wider than their body in order to lean. So a horse can't lean on something with their leg underneath them. They can, but they really don't like to. And that's where we end up having these scrambling issues in straight load floats, is that they're trying to lean against the wall, but they're unable to get their leg underneath themselves to support. And so they start to scramble. One of the really interesting studies, and this was something that I actually adopted over my time in Australia when I dealt with a lot of clients and I dealt with a lot of different kinds of floats and difficult travelers. If you have a straight load float or a trailer, and that's what you want to stick with, and you have multiple horses, actually removing the center partition and allowing the horses to lean on each other generally resolves almost any transport issue you're going to have in a straight load float. Horses actually like to lean on each other, and I cannot tell you how many scrambling issues I resolved by doing that. So if you have a straight load and you want to stick to that, but you're worried about your horse scrambling or being able to support themselves, actually just removing that center divider and letting them lean on the other horse, or making sure that the center partition is only a partition and not a full wall so that they can get their leg underneath of it to lean it. And even just putting a little bit of plywood or a little bit of angle on the wall, on the outside wall, so that the horse can get their foot wider than their body, or really strong, thick padding on the outside wall. So again, they can get their foot under where they need to lean. That makes a huge difference in their ability to rest their body. So you can stick with your straight load float. You just might need to make a few adjustments.
That's awesome. No, that's great advice. Great advice. Okay, where were we? Okay, pro tips. So ways you can monitor your horse. I mean, we have so much technology today. You can get these wireless thermometers that you can stick in there, the button, and then you can ride in the front of your truck or car, however you're hauling them, and you can actually read the temperature. So you know if it's really getting hot in there, the horse needs a break. You're going to need to open up the float and trailer, air it out a little bit, and give them a rest. Also, now you have wireless cameras. I have an infant at home. He's almost 1. We have it next to our beds, right? This technology is cheap and it's effective, and you can watch your horse while you're traveling. Dr. Mandy, one of our other veterinarians, I mentioned it in the comments. She has a friend that is traveling from Sydney to Hobart on a ferry. So it's one of the few instances of, I know somebody from New Zealand said, hey, I travel between the South and North Island on a ferry. So horses still do go on boats, but we're looking at strategies on how she can monitor those horses for 12 hours where they're crossing down to Tasmania in South Australia, or south of Australia. So these are things that are available to you today that are relatively inexpensive, and it maybe gives you peace of mind, and you can see how your horses are doing.
Dr. Chris, particularly the
Yes.
thermometer, like I live in New South Wales, and in summer it is very hot and it is very humid, and yet the amount of shows that are still held and
Yes.
people still choose to go, I think it's time for us to, really take on board what you're all saying. Do we really need to go to that competition knowing that it is so hot? It's going to be hotter inside the float. By the time they get there, they've already, competed. And we've just got to make better choices for our horses. We really do. There will be another competition, or make changes, go the night before when it's a bit cooler.
Yep.
But
Yep.
I think it's time for us to stop doing that. We really have to think what's best for them.
Oh yeah, living in Texas and Florida, travel early morning. Your horses they don't sleep 8 hours a night. They sleep intermittently throughout the day and night. They're up at 3 in the morning. You get up at 3 in the morning if you're going to travel. If you know the day is going to be really hot and make that trip, plan it accordingly. So it's just trying to reduce the stress as much as you can for your horses. Another common question was, length of travel. So here's some tips with travel duration. Every 3 to 4 hours, you want to stop, give your horse some water, let them rest. Again, that movement, that physical activity, but also pull off. Just don't pull over the side of the highway. Get off the highway somewhere safe where you're safe and you can uh, pull over safely. Give them more hay if they need it. Every 6 to 8 hours, that's when they really need a break. That's when, you need to, if you can, go to a facility where you can hand walk them, let them stretch, ventilate, uh, pick manure, replace any bedding you might have in there, replace the hay if they're in there, let them drink, give them a proper break. Every 8 to 12 hours, they need really an overnight or at least 8 hour break from travel. It's somebody asked in the questions, going from east to west coast in the United States, some truck companies just go straight. And when I worked at the racetrack in Southern California, we had horses coming from Kentucky. It was a straight trip. Not anymore. This was 20 something years ago. Don't really want to do that. You want to give the horses a proper break on their way as they're traveling. So what was next? Some other things, plan our routes carefully. I'm guilty of just getting on the highway and going, not thinking about it. Now, today we have sat navs. We just throw it on Google Maps or whatever we use. But, especially for those in Australia, I know where Linda is in Wollongong. If you're going up through Sydney up to Newcastle, I am not going anywhere like LA, United States, really 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. is a no-go zone. You're going to be in traffic. The roads aren't going to be clear. There could be, knock on wood, accidents, things like that, that is going to extend the duration of your travel. So plan your routes carefully, your rest stops carefully. Check that hydration. You can just do the skin pinch test and their behavior. Make sure your horse is all right. Always carry a first aid kit. I'm sure most everybody in here has one, but just in case anything goes wrong with your horses, any scrapes or cuts. Um, and the other thing that we don't think about is know your obligations of traveling. So I know in the United States, we need a negative Coggins test if we were going over state lines or health certificates. In Australia, there's restrictions. I know in Queensland, one of the concerns is certain areas you can't even bring your hay because of fire ants and concerns. So just know what restrictions are in place for travel wherever you live, and that will make your trip safer and less stressful for you. Because in the end, I know you're on here because you love your horses. And if we can make life better for them, you're going to be less stressed, right? And then you can compete at your best and enjoy your trips when you're doing this and your companionship with your animal. That's the bottom line. If they're healthy and happy, you're going to be healthy and happy. And it does impact all of us.
Amazing. Gosh, we have covered so much information. And as always, when I join these webinars, I learn something new. It's just been brilliant. Overwhelmed with how many questions have come through. I would even say it's almost a record. What we will do, because we won't get to all the questions before we're about to finish, so we will actually take them on board and we'll get those collated and emailed out to everyone. So many great questions. The engagement has been incredible. We've been doing these webinars really since Poseidon started. And for those of you who have been on the journey with us all that time, like Dr. Erin, our webinars have certainly evolved. I feel like we are one of the few companies in the world delivering incredible information with a whole range of topics. And also, we're not just focusing on how supplements, how amazing our supplements are, and they truly are, but it's much more about how do we feed our horses, how do we manage them properly, and then where do our supplements fit in. If you have questions post the webinar, you can always email us. For those who have been in contact with Poseidon before, we have an incredible customer service team that work directly with our vets and nutritionists. So anytime you come to us with a question that's technical, just know we are giving you the best information and advice. So please use us as a resource. This whole business started because we wanted to make life better for our horses. So please use these resources. We're really proud of what we have to offer. And now we have 3 prize packs to give away. As I mentioned, we've got one for each country. So in the US, we have Julesburg. From my understanding, we will reach out. I'll just check with the team here. So we'll contact them. Yep. So well done, Jules. We have an amazing team in the US. So it's fabulous that we've got people here joining the webinar from there. Lisa Barnes from Australia. And we have Bobby McCown from New Zealand. So well done. Incredible packs that you've just all won. Now, for the rest of you, you won't go away empty-handed. We actually have a discount code for 15% off, and it is time limited. So use that code, take a screenshot, make sure you jump on and use that. Stress Pace was developed in response to, Erin already mentioned the fact that we were syringing EQ, but I had a beautiful off-the-track thoroughbred, and I remember traveling in 10 hours once. This is before we'd started Poseidon. And all the issues that Dr. Tiffany spoke about, except we didn't get colic, that horse had. It was then I thought we've to create something for travel. And what we have to remember is our stress pace is not just for travel, it's for any time that a horse is placed under acute stress. So we're really reinforcing that we can never do enough for our horse's gut. So if your horse is under repeated, constant stress, digestive HP is your choice. and then you use stress pace strategically. If you have a horse that you want to give foundational gut support to, there's probably more of a pleasure horse that's not traveling, not competing. Digestive EQ is amazing. Collectively, we know they're the best supplements on the market. And when you have incredible people like our team, our technical team backing them, that gives you great confidence in what they're doing. So I think I have covered everything. Again, thank you for joining us, and you've all stayed right to the end. Thank you to our team. It's been having you here. I think I've used that word incredible lots today, but it truly has been. We will be sending out a recording, so you will get this. What we would love is to share this, because we feel everybody traveling their horse should know this. Again, as Dr. Erin said, we will continue to travel our horses, but how do we do it in a way that we prepare and we manage the known impact? Because the amount of people that say, my horse loves traveling, I just can't wait to get on that float. And it's like, really, does it? Because just because you can't see the changes, they're happening. So we owe it to them, and then we can, enjoy the journey with them. So again, thank you to our team. It's been wonderful having you here, and for everybody joining us. And we look forward to our next webinar. But again, we want to hear from you what the topics are. So please feel free to share, your insight and what you'd like to know more about. So thank you, Dr. Erin. Thank you, Dr. Chris, and thank you, Dr. Tiffany. Hope you enjoyed your first webinar with us, and feel very privileged to be working with such a wonderful team. Thank you, everyone.